Shalom, and welcome to the Parasha Pod. I'm Rav Mordechai Rosenberg, here with Rav Menachem Leibtag, and we are talking Torah together. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, it's time to learn.
Tavo.
Rav Leibtag, we start with a very familiar piece of Torah that is quoted every year at the Seder. This is the declaration that a person says when they bring their bikurim, their first fruits, to the Beit HaMikdash. And my question is, why is it that we choose this version of the retelling of the Exodus story to form the backbone of the story that we tell on Seder night? Why not any other story, any other version of the story?
And why that? I'll give you a better text from Devarim.
Go on.
Let's say your children would ask you a question, like the question, why keep all the mitzvot of the Torah?
Yeah.
So go back to Sefer Devarim in Perek Vav, right after Shema.
Yep.
Perek Vav pasuk. Shema was Perek Vav pasuk Daled, but pasuk Chaf, I think.
Yep.
In Perek Vav.
Mm-hmm.
Moshe Rabbeinu is anticipating a question, a famous one.
When your child asking today, that's the Chacham's question, the wise son's question.
We quote there from, our Seder quotes a lot from Sefer Devarim. We'll see why very soon. So should your child ask you, why keep all these mitzvot? What's the purpose of all these mitzvot? Right. What do you tell him? It's hard to say that without singing it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the famous. So that's another quote in Haggada, which is even a shorter version of the story.
Right.
And God took it back chazakah, and then He took us out, brought us to Israel.
Right.
A very similar thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, why specifically this one?
Yeah.
Now,
just to be clear, even though we do quote that one, this one is the bit that we expound.
So when you said we, right. Who decided we're going to say this at our Seder? Who said Chumash didn't say that. The Torah tells us, "Vigat levincha." Right. See that word, "Vigat levincha"?
Yeah.
I'll come back in a minute. But the Torah tells us, when your children ask you, when you start eating matzah, at the Seder, etc., when you bring Korban Pesach, when your children ask you, what's going on, tell them, even if they don't ask you, remember, Vigat levincha. That was the Shenu de Lishon. That's from chapter 13 in Shemot. The Mishnah actually tells us, the Mishnah says, the 10th parak in Pesachim, the Mishnah goes through the order of the Seder night, in order, pretty much, and says, here the son asks the question, etc., and we have a format, start with something derogatory, and then tell the story. And then it says, the way we tell the story, it doesn't say to read this, it says, V'dorshin me'armi avedavi ad shigmor et parsha kula. The text that the Mishnah decides to use to tell the story, the skeleton, or the framework, is going to be these 4 or 5 psukim from the declaration that the Torah tells us to recite when we bring our first fruits every year. We're going to use that, and we're going to sort of dissect it. In every single verse and in every single word or phrase, we're going to use that as a springboard to tell the story of the Exodus. And that's what we do at our Seder. In fact, that's the main section of the Seder. Yeah. It takes the longest time and the lengthiest. But the mechanism that the Mishnah says to use to tell the story is quoting these psukim. Right. Now, what I think the reason the rabbis are doing that, I'll give a real simple reason, think very deep, and then even a deeper reason. First of all, this mitzvah, if you remember the first line of this week's Parasha, why don't we do this nowadays? Why don't we bring our first fruits to the temple and make this recitation every year? There's a good simple reason. Well, we don't have a temple. We don't have a temple. Right. So why can't we do it without a temple? Because what's it say in the beginning? When you come to the land, v'yirishta v'yashavta. Right? After you conquer it, inherit it. It was when you have sovereignty. Right? And then where do you go to? You go to Hamakom Asher Yivchar Hashem. That's the theme of the speech ever since chapter 12. That's where you rejoice on the holidays, etc. There's Hamakom Asher Yivchar Hashem. We've had since chapter 12 as a central theme of all these mitzvot in Sefer Devarim. So we don't have, therefore, this commandment only applies when we have a temple and we're sovereign in our land and things are in an ideal state. So, in theory, we should be saying this every year, but we can't for sort of a technical reason. What I think the rabbis did in a very beautiful, I would say maybe backhanded way, they want to make sure the entire Jewish nation recites this proclamation every year, even though we can't. So we can't do it at the right time of the year when we bring our first fruits. So we use this recitation, this proclamation instead, to say at our Seder. So in essence, the entire Jewish people say Mikra Bikurim as a nation every year, instead of with our first fruits when we come to the temple, because we don't have that, we say it at our Seder.
So what's so important about it that we have to do it every single year, even if we can't bring our first fruits?
Because we're not thanking God for our first fruits. If
Okay.
you look carefully, we're thanking Him for the covenant He made with our ancestors. The keyword there is Shvuah. What's his opening line? I'm coming to tell you, remember, what's the opening statement the person makes when he brings his first fruits? Higadeti hayom l'Hashem Elokecha. Say the word lahagid.
Yeah.
I think the rabbis pick up on that for Vigat Levimcha.
Okay.
I'm making a statement. I have something to tell over. Okay? That where am I? I'm not in any land. I'm in the land that God promised with an oath to give my ancestors. That takes us right back to Sefer Bereshit.
Right.
Now, when did God promise this land to our ancestors? He promised it in Brit Milah and Brit Ben Abtarim, remember? When was it with a Shavuah? Remember? Rosh Hashanah is coming up, right? We're going to read on the second day the story of the Haggada. What did God say when the Malach came the second time? After He says, don't, put your hand down. Don't check your child. He says the Malach comes the second time in chapter 22 in Bereshit and says, "Bi nishbati num Hashem." God swears. That's the Shvuah. Kiyan asher sita davar zeh. Ki barech avrachacha. Going to bless you. Varbed zaracha kochochvei hashamayim. I'm going to multiply you like the stars of heaven. We'll come back with that coming from. That's from Ben Abtarim, isn't it? Right? Uchocho asher svat, like the sand of the sea. Bitbaruchu bezaracha kol gayaretz. And v'yirash zaracha. It's Sharav. Your offspring are going to inherit. See the word Yerusha, they'll inherit their enemies. Therefore, this has all the key phrases and the key themes of Brit Ben Abtarim. The first covenant God makes with Avram Avinu, the God who says, remember what did God tell Avram Avinu? Not only are you going to have children, like the stars of the heaven, those children that I promised you are going to conquer the land. Remember? And the reason I took you out of Or Kasdim in chapter 15 of Bereshit was to give you this land, the Rishta. Remember the word Yerusha, to conquer, to be sovereign. Avram asks the question, how and when it's going to happen. They have this little covenantal ceremony, cutting the animals apart. And then God gives Avram his famous answer. And pay attention to the answer that God gives Avram Avinu, which is the backbone, pretty much, to our proclamation of Mikra Bikurim. What did God tell Avram Avinu? You're going to have this land one day, but before you get the land, your nation has to go through what I like to call basic training. Yodo Teda, what do you need to know? Remember, Avram asked B'maida, that answers Yodo Teda. Yodo Teda ki ger yezarcha be'erzolhem. You're going to have offspring like the stars of the sky, but before they become a nation and get their land, they have to be strangers in someone else's land. But they're going to go through oppression and suffering and servitude. And it will come some 400 years. And then I'm going to punish the oppressor. Then they'll leave with great wealth. But it won't happen in your lifetime. It'll take some 4 generations, etc., maybe even 400 years or so. And then you'll get the land. And that day God makes a brit with Avram Avinu. You're getting the land. Now, that's the God, God's special name, Yud Ke Vav Ke, is central in that covenant. And that, where God promises Avram Avinu, I'm going to watch your history. It's going to be difficult, your history. And there'll be a purpose in your history. And remember what Sefer Dvarim does and how it redeems our history. Remember we had last week, all the mitzvot in all the previous weeks. Remember you were a slave in Egypt. Keep Shabbat, give your workers their rest. Remember you were a slave in Egypt. Free your slave after 7 years. Give him a bonus. Remember you were a slave in Egypt. Be nice to the stranger, because you were strangers in Egypt. Remember, harvesting your field. Remember, you can't forget shichacha. Leave it over. Same thing with your grapes and olives. Remember, you were a slave in Egypt. Don't mistreat the stranger, or don't take advantage of a yatom and amana. Remember, you were a stranger in Egypt. Everywhere you turn, that memory we talked about is a transformative memory that shapes our behavior. And therefore, if we're going to be in the land, and we're living in this agricultural land, and we're happy with our first fruits, when that season begins, when the summer fruit harvest begins, we want to thank God, not just for that they were chosen, that He gave us the land, but why He gave us the land. We need to understand and remember the land that God blessed us with is part of a covenantal agreement and has a covenantal purpose. Through that land, we sanctify God by how we act on that land. Therefore, to make sure we appreciate not only saying thank you, not only gratitude, not only expression of gratitude to God, but I like to call it a recognition of destiny. I'm making a statement as the year begins to remember the purpose of why God gave me that land. And if you look at the proclamation we make, line by line, it's Brit Ben Abtarim. What's the first line? In verse 5?
You're right.
I'll follow Ibn Ezra and the Parshanim who explained by Pshat. Was my ancestors, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, were wandering Armenians, because this fits. We didn't have a homeland. And what happened? We went down to someone else's land, small number, and we became a great nation, became a Goy Gadol in someone else's land.
Right.
That's God told Avram, your offspring will be a nation in someone else's land. And they're going to be, now what happens next?
Look, Vayagar Shamdim Teima'at, that's Geri Yezaracha.
There's Lolahem.
Right.
That happened to be Egypt now.
Yeah.
And then the Egyptians made us the Babylonians, the accused of trying to take over their country.
Right.
And then what happened? Vayanunu, Inuim and Avodah. We cried out to God. God heard our cry.
Wow.
And God took us out of Egypt. Remember? He said he'd punish our enemy and give us out great wealth in a miraculous way. And that's what he does. And then by Vino Malkomazeh, he gave us this land, the land flowing in milk and honey, etc. That's where he promised on that day, God said, I'll give you the land in the covenant of a Brit. And now, as a token of my appreciation, I'm presenting my first fruit. So we're not coming to the temple thanking God for my fruit. I'm thanking God for the covenant, and as a token of my appreciation, I'm presenting my first fruit. We're not coming to feed God, we're giving something symbolic. And in a beautiful symbolic way, I'm giving the fruit of the land to God as a symbol to remember, not just saying thank you for the land, but remembering the covenantal agreement and the condition and the purpose of why he gave us the land.
Right.
If I want to go even farther back a little bit, back in Breshit, remember the first one to bring an offering to God was good old Cain. What did he bring? Pri Hadama.
Okay.
And what's an expression of, it was sort of maybe like a consumer or something, and how are we going to fix that? We bring Bereshit Pri Hadama.
Okay.
So it's like what they would like to call in Kabbalistic terms, like tikkun. It's learning from the story of Cain and Hevel something much deeper about when you bring a present to God, you're not feeding God, you're coming to express your connection to God.
I see.
And therefore, that proclamation is going to be key.
Right. So it's a revision, in a sense, of our entire destiny as the Jewish people, and going back all the way to Avram Avinu, and maybe even to the dawn of humanity. And that's why the rabbi said, you've got to read this every year. And if we don't have a Beit HaMikdash to bring the first fruits, well, then we've got to include it in the Seder.
So we use the Seder. Now, at the Seder, we're not just thanking God for what he did. We're remembering why he did it. We're not just expressing our gratitude. Oh, thank you for taking us out of Egypt. Rather, we're remembering why he put us into Egypt to take us out of Egypt. To remember why he put us through slavery and oppression, to learn from that. Right. And why he gave us the land was, what was the purpose of redemption? Not freedom from, but freedom for. To get the Torah, to be God's nation. In that context, we get the land.
Nice.
So all those ideas, now, not only it's a beautiful way to tell the story of the Exodus in a framework, it's also the conclusion of this great final speech, which was given in Sefer Dvarim as we're about to conquer the land and become sovereign in the land and become a nation representing God. Because this is the last, remember this speech began in chapter 5? The last two mitzvot of the speech of 20-some chapters are two proclamations the Jew makes. One is a member of a nation coming to the temple, stating, I understand the purpose of this covenantal relationship and why you gave me the land, and this is the token of my appreciation. And then what's called Biur Masrot, a personal declaration, I've done my personal obligations in giving all the things I have to do with my fruit every third year, the year of Maser, what we call Maser Ani.
Nice. Very good. Thank you. All right. Now, we also have something that's not so exciting in this parasha, which is the curses, or the tochacha, right? The rebuke section. But it is an intense list of disastrous things that will befall our people if we stray from the covenant with God. Now, I've got a few questions on this, but let me stick to my most burning questions. Number one, we also have blessings, right? If you follow the mitzvot, you get some blessings. If you don't follow the mitzvot, you get some curses. But the blessings are far outnumbered by the curses. I mean, the curses, like 10 times more curses than blessings. So why do we place so much more emphasis on the bad stuff that will happen if you don't follow rather than the good stuff that will happen if you do follow? That's question one. And the other question is, this section doesn't appear to have a happy ending. There's no like, at the end of all these terrible things that happen to you, you'll return to God and you'll return to your land and you'll have safety and security again, like we had in the other version of the rebuke that we have early in the Torah.
In Parashat Bahar B'chukotai.
Right. So why do we have so many more curses and blessings, and why is there no happy ending?
So there's a happy ending, because the shorter version of this was earlier in chapter 4 in Parashat Bet Hanan, about Parashat HaTshuvah. Remember, Kitolid Banim Uvnei Banim in chapter 4, and you go astray. I'm warning you, I'll have to send you out of the land and punish you. And then you do tshuva there, and then you'll come back to me, and don't worry, you can always do tshuva.
So you're saying that...
Yeah. So the framework was already set, and if we don't stop the Parsha in the end of Parsha Ki Tavo, but we continue to Parsha Nitzavim, then we're going to find the fuller detail of Parshat HaTshuvah, that when all these terrible things happen, then ultimately God will bring you back to your land. The idea of Shivat Tzion, what we say in the Mishiberach for the Medina, God will bring us back from the four corners and bring us back to our land. That'll be in chapter 29, if I'm not mistaken, in Parshat Nitzavim, in Brit Nitzavim. Now, what's the connection between them? Maybe we'll say that for next week when we do Parshat Nitzavim.
Okay.
But this is very specific. There's blessings and curses. Now, there's the preamble to the blessings and curses, which are the warnings of the Arur, the curses, were things that people do privately. Because when you're addressing a nation, so we know our national behavior, people are on their toes. But what do you do in private? So almost all the curses are things that people do privately. It's a bit, don't like to call it a scare tactic, but that's what it sounds like. All these things are what's called beseter. There's mitzvot.
Right. Aru makera ehu beseter. Right. Curse is the one who strikes his friend.
And the arayot things, the bad relationships, those are things always done privately and quietly, that no one else sees. And or stumbling block and things like that, someone who can't see. So these are things that people think they can get away with because no one else is going to find out about it. So to warn people, I'm warning you. Yeah, it's classic. Does it work? That's an educational dilemma. And the same thing with the curses. The curses are harsh, but Chumash uses that idea right in the contract in the Ten Commandments. What's God say? I'm your God. That's why I took you out of Egypt, etc. And if you follow other gods, boy, you're in trouble. And we're very detailed, as Kana, Pokeravon, the Sonai, etc. And very short, Ose Chesed Lo Avai. So the warnings of punishment are much stronger than the warnings than the promises of reward. Now, why do you need reward and punishment? We're walking a bit of a tightrope, because that's why the first mitzvah in the speech is V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha. God wants us to do the mitzvot out of love, out of desire, out of doing it because it's the right thing, not what's it called? Quid pro. Not as a consumer. My goal is to get reward. Yeah. So even though you're doing it for the right reason, you still reward. Like, why should someone do something? Because it's the right thing to do, or to get reward and punishment? In theory, do it because it's the right thing to do. That's after Hashem Elokecha. In practicality, there's nothing like reward and punishment to keep you on your toes. Ask anyone in parenting and teaching, etc., in early education. We want to reach a goal of people doing things. It's the right thing to do. But to make sure people do the right thing, there's something like having rules and regulations and punishment and consequences. Now, you're talking about a major question in education. How much do we reward good behavior and how much do we punish for bad behavior? And what's going to get the best result? And if anyone knows parenting, neither's going to work. But you try your best. But you can't be too strict. You can't be too forgiving, etc. So in this section of Chumash, we're very strict. Now, how it plays out, I think as a rule of thumb, what God is saying is, you're chosen for a purpose, to be a nation representing God. That was a big theme from the beginning of the speech. If it's not working, something's wrong. And you need to know that when things start going bad, and God holds back the rain, right? And we have wars, or we have disease and things like that. That's a wake-up call from God, that we better do what we call tshuva. We better do some soul searching. What are we doing wrong? Now, what we're doing wrong, that's why God sends Nevi'im, or that's why we have to study the Torah to try to figure out what is it that we're doing wrong. So that's what's called Parashat HaTshuvah. How do you know what you're doing wrong? You have to study. And you have to see the bigger picture. That's what study's about. That's what the Nevi'im come and do. But to think that the things are by chance, that's for sure not. So as a rule of thumb, behind all these tochachot is a wider picture that God's saying, I'm giving you a land, I want you to be my nation, and you do a good job working for me, I'll take care of you guys. I'll make sure the land will be good for you. But if you don't think you can get away with this, having this land and not acting accordingly, and if you misbehave and don't follow the principles of Sefer Dvarim, and don't build that just society, if you don't become this mamlechet kohen v'goy kadosh through your behavior, God will have to send up a wake-up call. Now, again, I don't want to get into the argument of how do you know what you're doing wrong and how do you read God's messages. Well, that's already ask your local Navi. But to make sure we stay in the right direction, there's nothing like blessings and curses.
Okay, I hear you. But I would then expect the curses, the blessings to be coming kind of wholeheartedly. If let's say the ideal level is to be serving God out of love, and then the secondary level is to, if that's not working, then blessings and curses come in, and curses might be more, or rather, negative consequences might be more effective at promoting good behavior on a sort of less advanced scale. But what about the? There's one verse here that really gets to me, which is in chapter 28, chapter 28, verses 63, Samach Gimel. It says that, V'ayak asher sas Hashem aleichem leitiv etchem, la'arbot etchem, ken yasis Hashem aleichem, la'avid etchem, la'ashmir etchem, v'nisachtem me'al adama asher atav Hashem l'rishta. And as the Lord once delighted in making you prosperous in many, so the Lord will now delight in causing you to perish and wiping you out.
And gives a reason?
Yeah, and you shall be torn from the land that you are about to enter and possess. Like, this is really difficult to hear. I mean,
I think it came to us. Because you didn't serve God with happiness. And now,
right, that's verse 47.
Yeah, where do we have this theme of simcha earlier in the speech?
Well, at the
on the Shalosh Regalim, remember? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if I follow the way the rabbis understand, the way Rashi understood and the Rambam understands Simchat Yom Tov, is that it's not that you have to be happy, because the mitzvah to have happiness is that the holiday of the grain harvest, the Chagash and Shavuot, and Chag HaKatzir, and Chag HaSif, when you have what to be happy about. And what God is saying is, when you're happy naturally because you brought in your harvest, share your happiness with those who don't have.
Right.
And therefore, what's the list of people we have to make happy? Not just you and your family, but your servant, your maidservant, the stranger, the orphan, the widow, the Levite, the whole list of people who are less fortunate, who don't own land. And what God is saying, use your happiness as a tool in serving God.
Right.
Remember? Mizmor leTodah. Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha. Remember? No, it's use simcha. It's not that serve God and be happy when you serve God. Use your happiness as a tool in the service of God. If God blesses you with happiness and prosperity, use that prosperity to sanctify God by sharing that prosperity with those who don't have. So if God blesses you when you keep the mitzvot and you have your wealth, don't let that prosperity turn to affluence and haughtiness and injustice, but rather see yourself as a trustee. Use those blessings to serve God by building a better society and helping those who are less fortunate. Remember, God loves the stranger, and therefore you have to love the stranger. Remember, you were strangers in Egypt by always helping them. So that's going to be the key thing under all these mitzvot. And I think what God is saying is that if God blesses you and you don't use those blessings properly, I'm going to turn that around. Now, God isn't really, I wouldn't say he's happy to punish us, but he's saying there's a correlation. That just like I want to go out of my way to bless you when you're doing good, make sure you use those blessings properly. And I'm trying to fight this consumer model where the goal of the mitzvot in Devarim or in Chumash is not, I'm keeping the mitzvot so that I'll receive the blessing. The blessing is more like a barometer to tell you how we're doing. And therefore, God wants to make sure that when he gives us blessings, that we're not keeping the mitzvot just to receive the blessing. We're keeping the mitzvot because it's the right thing to do. And the indicator that we're doing the right thing is a blessing to show your gratitude and understand your destiny when God gives you a blessing, He's used that blessing to keep the mitzvot of Sefer Dvarim. If you're not doing that, God's going to go out of His way to take it away from you. And again, I hear your question, how come we use the same parallel, like God will be happy to punish you? I'm not saying I don't think He would really be happy, but He's going to use the same tool of reward. You can't miss in the Tochacha, there's a parallel between the reward and the punishment. Remember the blessings, Bracha Taber, Bracha Tabasadeh, etc. It's almost the exact opposite.
Right.
So Chumash is using almost the same wording in the blessing with the curses, simply to show the corollary between them.
In other words, the parallel is to show that the
goal is not the blessing.
Right. In other words, when we receive a blessing, we've got to use that blessing, and when we receive the curse, that it kind of is like the opposite of the blessing, directly to remind us of what we've done wrong. So that we can
make it nice and simple. Our goal is not to say thank you, but thank you.
Thank you. All right. Shkoyach. Well, thank you very much for that, and thank you to everybody for joining us. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.